The room went dead silent. All eyes turned to the microphone where Jason, a 16-year-old boy with a fire in his eyes, stood tall in front of Las Vegas's most elite. His voice cut through the thick tension as he declared, "I'm Jason Hayes, Dominic Hayes' son." In that instant, Dominic Hayes, self-made billionaire and engineering mogul, went pale. His hands trembled, his expression frozen in shock, and before anyone could react, he collapsed to the floor. Gasps filled the air, but no one could look away. His empire, the one he'd built, hidden behind layers of success and wealth, was crumbling before them. For years, Jason had watched his father from a distance, only seeing his name splashed across headlines and his fortune growing. All the presents, all the money, none of it mattered. Jason was still a stranger to his father, Dominic Hayes. Now, at the Westgate Grocery's annual gala, Jason had finally made his presence known, forcing the world and his father to face the past they'd tried to bury. This moment wasn't just about a child confronting a father. It was about the years of pain, unanswered questions, and a broken relationship that had been hidden behind Dominic's carefully curated image of success. The whispers began immediately, but as Dominic lay unconscious, Jason stood tall. The truth was finally out. Dominic Hayes wasn't just a genius engineer, he was a father who had abandoned his son for an empire, and the world now knew. The silence in the room wasn't just about the shock of Dominic's fall, it was the weight of everything he had lost. But the real question remained. Would this public unraveling heal the wounds of a lifetime, or destroy whatever remained of their broken family? Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. I've missed you. Thank you for standing with me through the technical issues. We're finally steady again, and your support is the reason this channel keeps going. Before we begin, I want to speak a quick blessing over everyone watching. To the women, may God strengthen your spirit and calm every storm in your heart. To the men, may God guide your steps and multiply your efforts, and may His protection stay over every one of you. Amen. I'm also celebrating my very first subscribers. Thank you. Your support means more than you know. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Your subscription, your likes, and your shares to friends and family keep this channel alive and growing. It truly makes a difference. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, so I know you're here with me. Now let's get into today's story. To understand how it all came to this, we have to go back to the beginning, a time when Dominic Hayes and Michelle, Jason's mother, had been a family. And yet, with every sacrifice made for success, every late night spent in a lab instead of at home, something precious was lost. Jason had always known something was missing, and now he was ready to find out what. Michelle Foster stood at the kitchen counter, her hands moving instinctively as she prepared dinner for her usual routine. She sliced vegetables with sharp, precise movements, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the otherwise quiet house. Jason was still at school, and the silence felt heavier without his banter filling the space. A small part of her had hoped that one day, somehow, Dominic would walk back into their lives and reclaim the family they once had. But deep down, she knew that wasn't going to happen. She'd been raised in a world where the belief was instilled that family came first, that no matter how much success you achieved, the love and care you gave to the people closest to you should always be your priority. But Dominic had been different. Michelle met Dominic Hayes in college. He was everything she had never expected. Brilliant, driven, and with a quiet intensity that had drawn her in from the moment they started working on a physics project together. She admired his intellect and his drive, which she saw as a kind of passion that could move mountains. Back then, their relationship had felt like a perfect balance of love and ambition. She believed that together they would build something extraordinary. The early days of their marriage were filled with late-night dinners, endless conversations about dreams and possibilities, and the excitement of starting a life together. But as Dominic's career took off, those intimate moments became fewer and farther between. Soon, those dinners became more like casual exchanges, his eyes more focused on the latest designs and prototypes than the woman across from him. She could see the toll it was taking on him, but she couldn't get him to slow down. Dominic's passion for his engineering work was all-consuming. He would stay at his office late into the night, sometimes not coming home until early morning, only to disappear again before breakfast. His work, which had begun as a promise to create something groundbreaking in the world of engineering, slowly turned into an obsession. A successful career was no longer just his goal, it was the very essence of who he was. Michelle had understood it at first, even admired it. After all, it wasn't easy to rise from humble beginnings to become the founder of one of the most respected engineering firms in the country. But as Dominic's success grew, so did his distance from their home life. The more he achieved, the less present he was. And then, one day, she was pregnant with Jason. Michelle was elated at the thought of becoming a mother, despite the looming uncertainty of how Dominic's increasingly demanding work life would affect their family. She knew what it would take: sacrifice, commitment, patience, but she thought that together they could balance it all. It was only after Jason was born that she realized how wrong she had been. Jason's infancy passed in the same way the early years of their marriage had Michelle shouldering the responsibility of their home and Jason's care, while Dominic buried himself in work. Every time Michelle called to tell Dominic about Jason's first steps, his first words, the moments she knew Dominic would have wanted to share, the phone would ring unanswered. Sometimes, when he did answer, he'd sound tired, distant. "I'll catch the next one. Michelle, don't worry," he'd say. But she couldn't shake the feeling that his priorities were slipping away from her. And with each passing day, that quiet ache in her chest grew stronger. She couldn't ignore the mounting emptiness as she realized that Jason, her precious, perfect son, was growing up without his father. It was in those quiet moments of realization that Michelle began to make decisions that would change the course of her life. As a single parent, she had learned to survive on her own terms. She poured herself into raising Jason, never once letting him feel the bitterness she had come to know all too well. She never let him see the pain of waiting for phone calls that never came, or the hurt that settled in her heart when Jason would ask about his father. She hid those parts of herself from him, keeping the mask firmly in place. The journal she kept was her only outlet. It was filled with letters to Dominic, words she never intended to send, pages upon pages of thoughts, frustrations, and dreams for their son. In the quiet, when the weight of motherhood became too much, she would write. She'd pen letters to Dominic, hoping that one day Jason would somehow get the chance to confront his father, to ask the questions Michelle could never answer. "I thought I could shield you from the truth," she had written on one of the pages. "But now, Jason is old enough to know. I've kept quiet for too long, kept my heart quiet for too long. But what I can't give him, Dominic, you have to give him. He deserves to know who you are." As Jason grew older, Michelle's efforts to protect him from the pain of his father's absence began to falter. Jason was becoming more curious, more aware of what was missing, and it was becoming harder to keep the truth hidden. She could see it in the way Jason would look at other families, the way he would silently observe the fathers at school events. He was a smart, intuitive kid. She could only shield him for so long. Michelle tried to distract him with everything she could. They had their little routines, their own traditions: Friday night movies, Sunday morning pancakes. But as Jason entered his teenage years, she saw it. The simmering frustration, the questions that would not go away. And so, when Jason found out that Dominic would be speaking at the Westgate Grocery's annual gala, it wasn't a surprise. Michelle had tried to warn him, to talk him out of it. She knew how much it hurt to have expectations shattered. But she also knew Jason was at an age when he needed answers. And for the first time in years, Michelle had to face the truth herself. She couldn't protect him from the questions anymore. Jason had decided that he needed to confront Dominic, not just for the years of broken promises or the gifts that never filled the hole left by his absence. No, Jason was determined to confront the man who had never been a father to him, not for himself, but for the closure that Michelle had never gotten. As Michelle watched Jason walk toward the microphone, she felt a mix of pride and fear. She'd done everything to protect him from this pain, but in the end, this was his fight to face. It was the one battle Michelle could never win for him, the one battle she hoped he could win on his own. What happened next, at the gala, was something Michelle could never have predicted. It was the culmination of years of silence, of secrets and unanswered calls, of a family fractured by ambition and neglect. And Jason, a brilliant, strong son, had just taken the first step toward finding out what it really meant to be a Hayes. Jason sat in the small, quiet corner of his room, his fingers tracing the edges of an old photograph. It was the only image of a time when life had been different. When he was just a toddler, his parents still shared a smile, real smiles, not the forced, empty ones he'd come to know. The photograph was taken at a family barbecue, back when Dominic's presence hadn't been a distant dream but a steady, grounding force in his life. Michelle was holding him, her eyes radiant with love, while Dominic stood beside them, his arms around both of them, looking like the proud father he should have been. Jason had never seen his father smile like that again. The picture was yellowing at the edges, worn down by years of being tucked away in a dusty drawer. It was a painful reminder of a time that felt so far away. The years of growing up without Dominic had shaped Jason in ways Michelle hadn't fully realized until now. As a child, he'd always sensed the absence of his father. At first, it was small things like when other kids would talk about their dads coaching little league games or picking them up from school. Jason had no such memories. His father wasn't there for school performances or parent-teacher conferences. The only time Dominic's name appeared in their home was when a new gift arrived, wrapped in a designer box, or when a check for his college fund was deposited into their account. But the presents didn't fill the empty space at the dinner table. The extravagant gifts didn't soothe the quiet nights when Jason would stare out the window, wondering what it would have been like to have a dad who sat on the couch, who read him bedtime stories, who was there when life got tough. Michelle worked hard, trying to be both mother and father to him. Jason admired her strength, the way she never faltered in her love for him, but he also felt her sadness at times. She'd always put on a brave face, but Jason could see the tiredness behind her eyes when she spoke about Dominic, the unspoken bitterness in her voice when she explained why he wasn't around. It was hard for Jason to understand. He was just a kid, after all, but as he grew older, the questions became sharper. Why didn't Dominic ever call? Why did he never make the effort to come home, even when the company had made him wealthy beyond imagination? Why did he have time for everything except his own family? In his teenage years, Jason began to push back more. There were arguments. He started to demand answers from his mother, questions that Michelle couldn't answer. Why does he get to go to all these fancy events while I sit here, alone? Why does he get to pretend I don't exist? And Michelle, unable to lie to him anymore, would always answer, because he chose his career over us, Jason. And that's something we have to accept. The hardest part, though, wasn't the distance Michelle worked so hard to bridge. It was the gnawing feeling of not knowing who Dominic really was. Jason wasn't just angry, he was curious. Every time he heard about some new groundbreaking project Dominic was involved in, he'd feel a mixture of pride and resentment. His father's name was a badge of honor, but it was one that Jason couldn't wear proudly. Dominic had built an empire, but Jason didn't care about the accolades or the fame. He just wanted a father. It was that growing frustration that led him to dig through the old family boxes one evening. He wasn't looking for anything specific, just something to help him make sense of the puzzle pieces that never fit together. And then he found it. The photograph of that perfect day. His parents happy, together. The way they looked at each other reminded him of something he'd long since forgotten. A time when he had a family. Staring at the photo, a decision formed inside him stronger than any of the hurt or confusion he'd felt up until now. He couldn't wait anymore. He couldn't keep living in the shadows of who his father could have been. He needed answers. And more than that, he needed closure. Jason looked at the picture one last time before putting it back in the box. His mind made up. He was going to confront Dominic. Michelle had always kept the hurt inside, trying to protect him from the truth of what his father had done. But Jason knew it was time for both of them to face it. He couldn't live with this unanswered question forever. It didn't matter how much it hurt, he needed to know who Dominic was, even if it meant facing a reality he wasn't ready for. Jason's fingers tightened around the edges of the photo, his heart pounding. In that moment, everything shifted. It wasn't just about confronting Dominic anymore. It was about taking back control over the life he'd spent years trying to piece together, trying to understand. It wasn't just about his father, it was about him. And for the first time, Jason knew exactly what he needed to do. Jason stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie for the 5th time. The sharp lines of the suit he wore felt foreign on his body. He wasn't used to dressing up like this. But tonight felt different. Tonight, he wasn't just a 6-year-old boy trying to fit in. Tonight, he was about to confront the man who had abandoned him for the last decade, Dominic Hayes, his father, the man who had built an empire but couldn't find the time to be a father. He barely recognized the man in the mirror. The suit, the polished shoes, it all made him look like someone else, someone who had it all together. But inside, Jason felt like a storm was brewing. The emotions inside him had been building for so long that he wasn't sure he could contain them any longer. He wanted to break down, scream, demand the answers he'd never received. But tonight, he was going to do something different. Tonight, he was going to face Dominic, look him in the eye, and finally take control of his own story. Jason had always imagined what this moment might look like, what he would say, how his father would react. But now that it was here, he realized he had no idea what would happen. All he knew was that he couldn't keep waiting for Dominic to come to him. He had to take the first step. No more waiting for a father who never showed up. He glanced at his mother, Michelle, standing quietly in the doorway, watching him. Her expression was a mixture of pride and uncertainty. Jason could see it in her eyes. She was proud of the man he was becoming, but she also understood the weight of the moment. She had always protected him, shielded him from the truth. But now, this confrontation couldn't be avoided any longer. Michelle hadn't slept a wink the night before. She tossed and turned, thinking about everything that had led them to this night. She knew Jason had to confront Dominic. She knew it wasn't healthy for him to keep living in this emotional limbo, carrying the burden of a father's absence. But still, part of her was terrified. What if this only made things worse? What if Dominic didn't care? What if Jason got hurt again? She had watched her son grow up in the shadow of Dominic's absence. She had seen the pain in his eyes every time another father attended a parent-teacher conference or coached a little league game. Jason had missed out on so much, and Michelle had done everything she could to fill the gap. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't give him what he truly wanted, a father's love, a father's presence. Now, standing in the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton, the reality of what Jason was about to do hit Michelle like a wave. She had supported him, but she didn't know if she was ready to watch him face Dominic and all the hurt he had been carrying for so many years. Still, she knew this was something Jason needed to do. He was growing up, and he couldn't keep looking for answers in the past. The past had already been written. As they arrived at the gala, the air was thick with anticipation. The lights were bright, casting long shadows across the ballroom floor. Guests in expensive gowns and tailored suits moved like ghosts through the glittering crowd. The hum of conversations mixed with the soft clinking of glasses, but none of it mattered. All Jason could focus on was the stage at the front of the room, where his father would soon stand. Jason walked alongside Michelle, his hand gripping hers just a little tighter than usual. She gave him a small, reassuring smile, but even she could sense the tension in the air. Jason's gaze drifted toward the podium where Dominic would speak. His father was out there somewhere, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. Jason's heart raced as he moved through the crowd. This was it. He couldn't turn back now. His mother was right there beside him, her presence grounding him, but it felt like all eyes were on him. It was hard to breathe, the weight of everything pressing down on him. But Jason was done waiting, done hoping. This was his chance to reclaim his own story, to stop being the forgotten son. Jason walked into the gala with his mother at his side, and the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. You know the pain of wanting something you can't have, but Jason is ready for whatever the truth may bring. If you've ever been hurt by someone you loved, this story is for you. Subscribe to witness a powerful journey of courage and confrontation. As they reached the stage, Jason took a deep breath. His hands trembled, but he refused to let fear control him. This was his moment. and he wasn't going to let it slip away. The crowd parted as they made their way to their seats, Jason's eyes searching for his father in the sea of unfamiliar faces. There, at the far side of the room, was Dominic standing tall, surrounded by admirers, his expensive suit and confident smile betraying nothing of the truth that lay buried beneath the surface. Jason could feel it. This was the moment everything would change. He knew the truth now. The truth about his father. The truth about why Dominic had never been there. And, for the first time in his life, Jason was ready to face it. The noise around him felt muffled, as if he were underwater. Dominic Hayes blinked slowly, his vision swimming in and out of focus. The sudden, brutal impact of reality. The shock of Jason's revelation still had him reeling. His legs felt like rubber, and he could taste the bitter tang of panic in his mouth. He had never been a man to lose control, to let anyone see his vulnerability. But tonight, in front of hundreds of people, the walls he'd so carefully built began to crumble. He tried to sit up, gripping the edge of the table for support, but his head spun with the force of what had just happened. Jason's words echoed in his mind. "I'm Jason Hayes, your son." The world had stopped for a moment. The silence in the room so deep, it felt suffocating. Dominic, the billionaire mogul, the man who had built an empire, had just collapsed in front of everyone, not from physical exhaustion, but from the crushing weight of the truth. Jason was his son, his flesh and blood. Dominic tried to speak, to regain some semblance of control, but his voice faltered. He cleared his throat, but the words that came out were barely more than a whisper. I'm sorry." The apology felt empty, hollow, and Dominic knew it. He wasn't sorry for the things he had done. He was sorry for what his actions had cost him. For the father he never was. As he tried to stand, his body trembling, his eyes locked onto Jason, who stood across the room, eyes hard with anger, disappointment, and something else. A burning sense of justice. Jason had made his stand. Now, it was Dominic's turn to face the consequences. His son was no longer the little boy who waited by the phone for a call that never came. Jason had grown up, and now he was demanding answers. Dominic's world, carefully constructed over decades, was unraveling in front of him. The grandeur of the Gala, the wealth, the adoration, it all felt so meaningless now. In the eyes of the people who had always looked up to him, Dominic saw nothing but judgment. They weren't looking at him as the successful engineer or the philanthropist anymore. They were looking at him as a failure, a father who had chosen ambition over family, a man who had used his success to cover up the cracks in his personal life. But those cracks were now wide open for the world to see. Jason's voice rang out again, sharp and unwavering. "I didn't need your money, Dominic. I needed you. I needed a father." The words cut through Dominic like a blade, and for the first time, he understood just how much he had lost, how much he had sacrificed in the name of success. The foundation he had built his entire life on, his career, his reputation had come at the expense of the very people he should have cared for the most. The perfect facade he had crafted, with its polished speeches and charitable donations, had only masked the emptiness of his home life. The more he succeeded, the more he lost himself. The more he turned his back on the people who truly mattered. Dominic had spent years convincing himself that everything he was doing was for them, for his family. He told himself that Jason would understand when he was older, that Michelle would be proud of him for what he had built. But now, standing in front of his son, he realized the painful truth. He had never been there for his family, not in the way that mattered, and no amount of money, no charitable donation, could ever fix that. Jason's eyes were unwavering as he stepped forward, his voice a steady force in the room. "You've built your empire, Dominic, but look around you. Look at everything you've sacrificed to get here." His words hit harder than anything Jason had said before. "I'm not asking for your apology. I'm asking you to see the damage you've done." Dominic's chest tightened. The anger, the guilt, it was all there, swirling inside him. He had wanted to be a good father, he told himself. He had wanted to be someone Jason could look up to. But what had he really given his son? A house filled with presents, a bank account full of numbers, and a lifetime of promises that never came through. He had failed Jason, and more importantly, he had failed himself. As Dominic struggles to explain his actions, Jason stands resolute. "I didn't need your money. I needed you," Jason says. The pain is clear in his voice. If you've ever been let down by someone you trusted, this story is a reminder of the importance of showing up for the ones we love. This is the moment to subscribe to witness the emotional weight that families bear. Dominic's face crumpled as he looked at Jason. There were no words left, no excuses he could make. He had chosen work over family, and now he had to face the consequences. The world he had built had always seemed unbreakable, but now it was collapsing bit by bit, piece by piece, revealing a man who had spent his life chasing something that would never replace the love and connection he had lost. For the first time, Dominic Hayes was truly humbled, and in that moment, he realized that no amount of success could fill the emptiness inside him. The room was still, like a tension-filled breath held in anticipation. Jason stood before his father, every muscle in his body coiled tight, every word he had rehearsed in his mind now crumbling away into something raw, something real. Dominic, pale and still trembling, struggled to meet his son's gaze. The towering man who had once commanded boardrooms, who had stood in front of the world with all the confidence in the world, now felt small, broken by the weight of his own mistakes. "Jason," Dominic's voice cracked, weak, barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I should have." Jason cut him off, his words sharp, precise, and steady. "Stop." His eyes were cold, but there was an underlying pain that Dominic couldn't ignore. "You don't get to do that, Dominic. You don't get to apologize for the years you've stolen from me, for the years you've stolen from us." Dominic recoiled, like the words had physically struck him. He opened his mouth again, but no sound came out. What could he say? What was there left to say after a decade of neglect? After all the promises he'd broken without a second thought? Jason's eyes hardened as he took a step closer, his voice never wavering. "You're sorry. You're sorry you weren't there when I needed you the most. Sorry for the birthdays you missed, for the nights I waited by the phone for a call that never came." He paused, his words sinking into the heavy silence. "You're sorry, but I'm the one who had to live with that." The crowd surrounding them had fallen silent, hanging on every word, but Dominic was too lost in the weight of his son's pain to notice. He couldn't meet Jason's eyes. His own shame was too heavy to bear. Jason's chest tightened as the anger he'd carried for years began to flood to the surface. It wasn't just anger, it was betrayal, resentment, and hurt. His father's absence had been a wound that had never fully healed, and now it was all spilling out, an open wound bleeding onto the floor of the Gala. But as the words left his mouth, something shifted inside him. He could feel the years of suppressed emotions clawing their way up to the surface, but there was something else there too, a feeling he hadn't expected. "I don't need your apology, Dominic," Jason continued, his voice quieter now, but no less intense. "I don't need you to say you're sorry. I don't need any of that. I don't need your money, your gifts, or your promises." He paused for a moment, and Dominic's breath caught in his throat. What was Jason saying? Jason looked up, his gaze locked on his father's, unwavering and steady. "I've already forgiven you." The words hit Dominic like a wave, drowning him. Jason's revelation stunned the entire room, but for Dominic, it was like he had been struck by lightning. Forgiven him? After all the years of abandonment, after all the pain he had caused, how could his son, his own flesh and blood, be capable of such grace? Jason's eyes were softer now, the anger slowly giving way to something more profound. "I forgave you a long time ago, Dominic. Not because you asked for it, not because I expected you to change, but because I needed to move on. I needed to stop carrying the weight of your mistakes on my shoulders." He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Forgiveness isn't about you, it's about me. I did it so I could finally stop being angry, so I could heal. But it's not your forgiveness I'm looking for. It's mine." Dominic stood frozen, unable to speak. The room was still as the gravity of Jason's words settled into the air like dust. Jason had already moved beyond the bitterness and hurt that had defined his life for so long. He had chosen to let go, and in that moment, it wasn't just forgiveness, it was freedom. Jason took another step back, his posture straightening as he looked at his father, who still couldn't find the words. So, no, I don't need you to apologize. What I need now is for you to stop pretending like you've done enough. I need you to see that I'm not the boy I used to be, waiting for you to come home. I'm not that boy anymore. And I'm not here for your approval, Dominic. I'm here to take back control of my life. Dominic's eyes were filled with unshed tears, but no matter how hard he tried, the words wouldn't come. He had spent so long convincing himself that his success justified his absence, that Jason's strength in this moment, his ability to forgive and move on, to take charge of his own story, had shattered everything Dominic thought he knew about himself. As Dominic struggles to explain his actions, Jason stands resolute. I didn't need your money. I needed you, Jason says. The pain is clear in his voice. If you've ever been let down by someone you trusted, this story is a reminder of the importance of showing up for the ones we love. This is the moment to subscribe to witness the emotional weight that families bear. For the first time in years, Jason was free. The weight of his father's absence, of his betrayal, no longer had a hold on him. And in that freedom, Jason realized something that Dominic had never fully understood. The power of forgiveness wasn't in healing the past, it was in letting go of it and moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, Jason knew he could finally do that. Dominic stood at the edge of the balcony, the cool Las Vegas night air brushing against his skin. The glittering lights of the city stretched out before him, endless and powerful, just like the empire he had built. For years, this view had been his reward, a symbol of everything he had worked for: success, recognition, the respect of the world. But now, staring out into the night, all he saw was the void, the empty spaces that his success could never fill. He could still feel the weight of Jason's words, heavy in his chest. Asterisk, I didn't need your money. I needed you. Asterisk. The words echoed in his mind, replaying over and over like a cruel reminder of everything he had lost. He had been so focused on building something that would stand the test of time, on creating something that would leave a legacy, that he had forgotten what truly mattered. He had thought his work was everything, but now, standing in the silence of his mansion, he realized that success had cost him more than he could ever repay. For years, Dominic had convinced himself that his work, that his engineering genius, was his way of providing for his family. Every late night in the lab, every hour spent away from home, had been justified by the idea that he was creating something that would benefit people, that would change the world, but at what cost? Jason's face flashed in his mind, his son, now a young man, standing before him with eyes full of anger, disappointment, and a deep sense of loss. Dominic had missed it all. The birthdays, the first day of school, the moments that mattered the most. His career had been his escape. The late nights in the office, the never-ending meetings, the constant drive for more. He had buried himself in his work because it was easier than facing the truth, facing the fear that he wasn't enough, that he wasn't worthy of being a father. Dominic had spent so many years building his company, constructing a facade of success, that he had forgotten how to be present, how to connect. He had convinced himself that his absence was excusable because he was doing important work. But now, with everything crumbling around him, he couldn't hide from the painful truth anymore. The sound of footsteps broke his reverie, and Dominic turned to see Michelle standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She had been quiet since the gala, but he knew she was watching him, waiting for him to finally confront the wreckage of their life together. "Michelle," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. "I don't know how to fix this." She didn't speak at first, just looked at him, as if deciding whether to trust him with her response. After a long pause, she stepped into the room, her gaze soft but firm. "You've spent so many years building this empire, Dominic," she said, her voice steady. "But what good is an empire if you're the only one standing in it?" Dominic's chest tightened. She was right. He had built a life that looked perfect from the outside, an empire of steel, innovation, and wealth, but it was a house of cards. And now it was all falling apart. He had traded everything, his time, his family, his integrity for the idea of success. But now, in the quiet aftermath of everything. He saw that none of it had mattered. "I was never a father," Dominic said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could be both the engineer, the visionary, and a father, but I couldn't. I was afraid that I wouldn't be good enough for him, that I wouldn't know how to be the man he needed me to be." Michelle's face softened, but there was no anger in her eyes anymore, only the deep, quiet sadness that had been there for years. "I'd built my work around my insecurities," Dominic continued. "I thought that if I could build something big enough, powerful enough, I'd prove that I was worthy. But I was never worthy of you or Jason, not in the way you needed me to be." Michelle didn't say anything for a long time. She simply looked at him, as though absorbing the weight of his confession. But for the first time, she saw the man behind the empire, the man who had been so lost in his own fear that he had shut out everything that truly mattered. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and careful. "It's too late for apologies, Dominic. What matters now is what you do with the time you have left. Jason may never forgive you. He may never see you the way you want him to, but that doesn't mean you can't try." Dominic looked down, the weight of her words sinking deep into him. The reality was inescapable. Jason might never give him the chance to rebuild their relationship. But perhaps, just maybe, he could start with something small, start by trying to be present, by making the effort to be the man he should have been all along. Dominic has spent his life building an empire, but now, faced with the wreckage of his family, he realizes that success comes at a heavy cost. If you've ever put something else above what truly matters, this story is for you. Watch as the emotional weight of years of neglect finally catches up with Dominic. Subscribe to see how families are torn apart and how they might begin to heal. Dominic turned back toward the balcony, staring out at the sprawling city below. It was too late to fix everything, but maybe it wasn't too late to start. The silence between Jason and Dominic hung heavy in the air, a quiet that stretched across days, each moment more suffocating than the last. The anger Jason had carried for so long had finally burned itself out in that confrontation. It wasn't gone, but it had shifted into something else, something more tangible, something that didn't bind him to his father anymore. Jason had spent years hoping that one day Dominic would come to his senses, that one day his father would see him as something more than a casualty of ambition. But the reality was clear now. The man he had once hoped to find wasn't coming back, and Jason could no longer wait. The week after the gala was one of quiet reflection for Jason. The city outside his window moved in its usual frenzy, the lights flashing like a million unspoken possibilities. But Jason wasn't focused on the world beyond his window anymore. He had spent so much of his life trying to fit into the shadows of his father's world, but now he was learning to step into the light on his own terms. He had grown up under the weight of someone else's expectations, his father's success, his father's legacy, and for the first time, he felt free to let go of it. He didn't need Dominic's approval to make something of himself. He didn't need the wealth, the name, or the title. What he needed was to define himself, not by the man who failed him, but by the person he was becoming. Jason sat at his desk, a notebook in front of him. He had always been good with his hands, a natural inventor, much like his father had once been. But where Dominic had poured his soul into building an empire, Jason found his joy in creating something simple, something for himself. The sketches on the page weren't for anyone but him. They were a representation of his future, one where he didn't have to carry the weight of his father's ghost anymore. The phone on his desk buzzed, breaking the silence. A message from Michelle. "Dominic wants to meet." Jason stared at the words for a moment, his fingers hovering over the phone. His stomach tightened, but something inside him knew that this meeting would be different. It wasn't about closure anymore. It wasn't about seeking answers from someone who had never been able to give him what he needed. This time, it was about moving forward, about understanding that no matter how much Dominic wanted to repair what was broken, Jason was no longer tied to the past. That afternoon, Jason met Dominic at a small cafe on the edge of town. The place wasn't fancy or grand, it was quiet, tucked away from the bustling streets. It was the kind of place Jason had always avoided, the kind where people went to talk about the things they never said in public. Dominic was already there, sitting at a corner table, looking smaller than Jason had ever remembered. The polished suit, the expensive watch, none of it mattered now. Dominic looked tired, drained, as if the weight of his failures was finally catching up with him. Jason sat down, his heart racing, but his mind calm. "You wanted to talk," he said, the words coming out more evenly than he expected. Dominic nodded, his voice low. "I don't expect forgiveness, Jason. I can't undo the past, but I need you to know that I've spent every day since we last spoke wishing I had done things differently." He paused, his hands trembling as he took a deep breath. "I've been a terrible father." Jason stared at him for a long moment, his thoughts spinning. But something had changed. The anger he had once felt was now replaced with something else, understanding, maybe even a quiet acceptance. "I don't need your apology, Dominic," he said, the words sounding almost foreign on his tongue, "but I need you to know that I'm okay now. I'm not looking for you to fix things. I'm not the same kid I was before. I'm making my own path." Dominic's eyes filled with something Jason couldn't place. "You're stronger than I was, Jason. I never realized how much you needed me until it was too late." Jason nodded, his gaze softening. "It's not about what you can give me anymore. I've learned to take care of myself." Dominic seemed to process the weight of Jason's words, the realization that he had lost his chance to be the father Jason had once needed. But there was something in his voice that felt different this time. Something genuine. "I'm here, Jason," he said. "I'm here if you ever need me. Not as your father who failed, but as someone who wants to be there for you, in whatever way you need." Jason chooses to move forward, but some things can never be fully healed. It's time to reflect on your own life. If you believe in second chances and the power of self-reliance, this is the chapter where you'll see how much strength it takes to move on from the past. Subscribe now to follow the journey of healing. Jason didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a deep breath, his gaze drifting to the window. The city outside was still, but in his heart, he knew he had taken the first step toward something new, something for himself. It wasn't the ending he had hoped for, but it was the one he needed. And in that, Jason realized, the most important thing wasn't that his father had failed him, it was that he had learned how to live without that failure defining him. The weight of the decision felt like it was pressing down on Jason's chest, heavier with each passing second. It wasn't a choice he'd made lightly, but one he knew had to come sooner or later. For years, his life had been defined by the absence of his father, Dominic Hayes. The anger, the longing, the unresolved questions, it all led to this moment. He sat alone in his room, the city lights of Las Vegas flickering like distant stars. Jason's mind wandered to the conversations he had with Dominic, the subtle shifts in their dynamic. He had forgiven him. Yes, but forgiveness wasn't the same as reconciliation. Jason had given up waiting for the father he once hoped for. But now, the decision was his to make. Could he let Dominic back into his life, or was it time to walk away for good? Jason thought back to the last meeting with his father at the cafe. Dominic had apologized, had acknowledged his failures. He had offered his time, his support, things that Jason had always wanted but never received. But what was that worth now? Jason had spent years building a life outside of his father's shadow. He had his own identity now, his own path. He wasn't sure he could let that go. The air in the room felt thick with the weight of his decision. Jason's hand rested on the window ledge as he looked out at the city that had watched him grow, and in many ways had helped him heal. It was his city, his future, his life. He had stopped being the kid who wished for a different life, one where his father would show up and make everything right. Now, he was becoming the man who could make his own life, with or without Dominic. But the question gnawed at him. Could he really leave his father behind? Jason had learned a lot over the past few months. He had learned that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean pretending the past never happened, and it certainly didn't mean giving someone the power to hurt him again. But it also didn't mean closing the door forever. He had built up walls around himself, walls that had kept him safe from the pain Dominic caused, but walls that also kept him from moving forward. Wasn't it time to tear those walls down? The phone buzzed on his desk. interrupting his thoughts. A message from Michelle. Dominic wants to see you again. He said he's ready to do things differently. No more empty promises. Jason stared at the message for a long time, his finger hovering over the screen. He knew that seeing his father again would bring back memories he wasn't sure he was ready to relive, but he also knew that he couldn't keep running from the past. He had spent so much time wishing for a father who could never be the man he wanted, but he hadn't considered that maybe it was time to just accept who Dominic was and choose whether or not he could move forward with him. Jason closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of the decision finally sinking in. He didn't need to wait for Dominic to change. He didn't need to put his life on hold, waiting for his father's approval, or waiting for the man to suddenly become the father he had always hoped for. Jason had already built the life he wanted. He had already defined who he was. The question wasn't whether or not he could forgive Dominic. It was whether or not he was willing to let his father be part of that life on his terms. Jason stood up from the window and walked over to the phone. With a steady breath, he typed a response. I'll meet you tomorrow, but things will be different. No more pretending. He hit send, his heart racing. As the words settled into his phone, he realized something powerful. The past no longer had a hold on him. The future was his to shape, and for the first time, he felt like he could face it with clarity. The next day, Jason met Dominic again. But this time, there was no pressure, no expectations, no apology needed. It was simply two people, father and son, sitting down to talk about what they could still salvage. Jason had made his decision. He wasn't going to try and fix a relationship that was broken beyond repair, but he was willing to start something new, something that was built on truth, respect, and boundaries. The past was still there, but it no longer had the power to control him. Dominic looked at him across the table, and for the first time, Jason saw him as a man, not a myth. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't the father Jason had always wanted. But he was trying, and that was all Jason could ask for. Jason walks away from the past, but not without the lessons that shaped him. This is where his journey truly begins. If you've ever had to make a difficult choice for your own happiness, this story will resonate with you. Subscribe for more stories of personal growth and redemption. Life is full of second chances, and Jason's future is only just beginning. As Jason walked away from the meeting, a sense of peace washed over him. He had let go of the past, but he had also opened the door to a new beginning, one where he could live life on his own terms, with or without the past weighing him down. The future was wide open, and for the first time in his life, Jason was ready to embrace it fully. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine, so do check it out. And do well to click on the subscribe button and turn on notifications for the next story.